Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Liverpool Transfer Show on Football Talk Podcast. My name is Ozzy, and I'm your host for this evening. I thought yesterday the rumors was heating up. Today, it's excelled a lot more. So let's get into the breaking news of today, and that is regarding Alexander Isak. So just to reveal what's happened, because there's been a lot of developments in the course of the day. So Liverpool have made an approach to sign Newcastle striker Alexander Isak. We've heard that contract extension talks between Newcastle and Isak have ended. So this would indicate that a move could be on the cards. Despite letting the press know that Isak's not for sale, internally, Newcastle are bracing themselves for an official bid from Liverpool that could be in the range of 120 million to 130 million. Newcastle fans were very arrogant when I was on social media yesterday, thinking there's no way Isak would leave Newcastle, and they thought that the club are signing both Isak and Ekitike to form a formidable partnership. Well, that tone certainly changed this morning. Some fans were very, very worried. Some were shameless to suggest that Liverpool have no chance of signing Isak and saying all this news is fake news. But when you've got two respectable journalists in Fabrizio Romano and David Ornstein reporting it today, you know, you can't really go, uh, against the grain in that regards. And look, Newcastle fans were still a bit shameless and still in slight denial. Got a tweet here from a Newcastle fan who's suggesting that Liverpool's sources for Isak are, trust me, lad, it's not. It's David Ornstein and Fabrizio Romano. So let's get that straight. And I think Newcastle fans need to relax a little bit. I've seen a few tweets. I can't present it all on the screen, but I think next time I may do that. They're slightly arrogant because they're thinking they're signing Ekitike. Of course, they've already made a couple of signings in Trafford and Elanga, but for some reason they just feel like they're untouchable right now, or they feel like Liverpool don't have the pull or have that power to sign a player like Isak. So I think they need to just calm down a little bit. Otherwise, we'll come and take Anthony Gordon off your hands as well, just for giggles. But on top of that, Man City fans were a little bit vocal today online, suggesting that Liverpool are ruining football because of their high expenditure so far in the summer, which is very ironic coming from Man City, who pretty much bought their success in the last 10 or so years. And there was one person that tweeted, and I thought, let me share it on the show. Um, Obviously, with sarcasm, he's said Manchester City are ruining football. And then he's only done this year's, or should I say, he's only done this window's sort of expenditure. He hasn't mentioned January, where, Man City spent about 200 million in that one. But, of course, agendas don't fit in regards to this current tweet here. And he's suggesting that Liverpool spent 250 million on three players. Please get your facts right when you're going to, talk about another team. Frimpong wasn't signed for 45 million, signed for 30. Kerkez was not signed for 55, he was signed for 40. And Verts was not signed for 150 million. Otherwise, that would have been the transfer record. He was signed for 100 million. So, get it right. And then, of course, his fees for the other players probably be all right. I think Reinders was a little bit more, but, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But what this goes to show to me is that these fans are scared. they are shitting themselves. Excuse my French. Uh, they're very shook. And look, if we sign Isak, I'm telling you now, it's a wrap. As they say in boxing, we're coming for all the belts. We're going to try and unify all the titles. And I'll say it shamelessly, we're going for the quad because having Isak in this team alongside Florian Wirtz, alongside Gakpo, Diaz if he ends up staying, Mohamed Salah, so both lads just to add into the mix that those level of players in our attack, there's not many teams that can match that. So for me, this would be a sensational move if we were to get um, Alexander Isak over the line. But before I get ahead of myself, there is one thing that I'm liking about this current situation, and it's the fact that Liverpool are moving like a big club. We're not taking any nonsense from anyone, and we're finally pushing our weight around. And it's about time as well, if I'm being honest. And my sporting director, Richard Hughes, okay, I'm a bit shameless to say that, but he's currently playing 4D chess where everyone else is playing checkers. Newcastle, as I mentioned earlier on, are expecting us to place an official bid very, very soon. So let's say we table a bid of around 120 million pounds, which would be the British transfer record. Now, this is when British Hughes shows who's boss. If Newcastle reject this bid, our response will be, okay, that's fine. You rejected our bid. We'll just go ahead and sign your primary target, which we all know is Hugo Ekitike. And on top of that, you'll have a striker in Isak who will probably be annoyed about not making a move this summer, and he hasn't signed a new contract and won't want to do so anyway. So in 12 months' time, you'll have a player who will be disgruntled, might not have performed to his best due to not being happy when his morale is quite low. He'll probably be available for less money this time next year, and he will probably have 2 years remaining in his contract. So the time is decreasing, so the value won't stay as high as it probably currently is right now. So play it how you want, Newcastle. All I know is that it's going to end in misery in some shape or form. Whether we get Isak or not, we'll most likely get Ekitike as our signing for this summer. And look, I'm probably talking a lot of chess right now, but we should be a little bit, cheeky or cocky with it because we're moving like a big club finally for the first time. We're moving like Debo in Friday. That's how it should be. We are one of the elite clubs in world football. So it's about time that we're moving like it right now. But in terms of my verdict, do I see us signing Alexander Isak this window? Honestly, I do. I've been saying it for a few weeks now. I've just got this feeling that he's going to join us this summer. Newcastle are trying to be smart by signing his replacement in Ekitike first, and then make it seem like that they had ambitions to have both players leading their attack just to appease the fans. But in reality, Isak has probably voiced his desire to leave the club and join the Premier League champions. But look, only time will tell. Um, but what I will say is I'm patiently waiting for this type of announcement to appear on my social media feed. And if it does, you already know that I am going to be shameless on that day. I'm going to be bringing out the shisha that I do when we make a special signing, and yeah, it will be a celebration. If we were shameless with the Vert signing, I think the Isak one will just top it off even more. So something to look forward to. Um, but I think this move will definitely develop in the coming days, and you never know what happens. We might even get an official bid at some point this week. So we got to do what we've got to do. Just got a couple more comments before we move on to the next rumor. Mazzy, big up Mazzy. He says, Ozzy, how do you feel about Liverpool potentially signing Isak? If we get him, do you think we'll win the quadruple or at least two big trophies? Honestly, I feel like we'll definitely try and go for the quad. Whether we do it or not, it will still depend on other areas of the pitch. So, for example, if Luis Diaz leaves Liverpool, which looks like it could be the case, I'm sounding a bit hesitant because it's very clear he wants to leave, but the club, can probably hold off any clubs from signing him this summer because we have a valuation. If that valuation is not met, then I doubt Liverpool will just sell him for the sake of it. So if Diaz stays, that puts us in a very strong position because he's a player that we know is capable of playing up top if required, and is playing in his predominant position, which is left wing. So he gives us that strength and depth within our squad. It would also depend in terms of what happens in our defense if we sign Mark Gay, which I believe we will at some point. But maybe the focus now is to try and sign a striker due to the unfortunate passing of Diogo Jota last week. So the club have, shift their focus on signing attackers, and that will definitely define, where we stand into the coming season. If we get Mark Gay, also the Konate situation, I feel like it's a bit of a gray area because if he wants to leave, he needs to leave this summer, in my opinion. No point having him for 12 months. I'd rather sell him now than have a player who's already got eyes on another team next season and isn't playing wholeheartedly. There's no point of having that type of player in the squad, in my opinion. So if he's not going to sign that contract, we need to sell him right now. That would be my standpoint on Konate for this summer. And I would like us to get another midfielder. If we were to get one more midfielder, then honestly, we've got a complete squad there. If it's just Isak and Gay, I still feel like we can challenge for the quad, but I can't say with chest that we will get the quad. But in terms of the big two trophies you mentioned, I 100% we think we can challenge, we can win those trophies with the current squad. We've got a lot of strength and depth in our squad. It's not just our front, first 11, that's really good. I think down to the bench as well as players away from the bench, it's still high quality players in our squad. So for me, I'm very, very pleased in terms of what Liverpool are doing in terms of the business. Richard Hughes is finally, making moves right now. So yeah, I'm going to eat humble pie by the end of this window, that's for sure. And look, I love to be proven wrong. So in this case scenario, if it benefits Liverpool, I'm all for it. I'll happily say that I was wrong about Richard Hughes. But I actually feel like this is going to be a special season for us. It already feels like a special transfer window, probably one of our best ever. So if we can top it off with signing Isak, Mark Gay, and if we can get another midfielder, that would be the icing on top. So really, really looking forward to the next season coming up. And yeah, exciting times to be a Liverpool fan right now. Double D, big up Double D says, LOL, shameless. Yeah, you gotta do it sometimes. You gotta paint the picture and say things um through emotion as well. I got to feel this kind of, got to feel like Debo at times and just, put our weight around when it needs to be done. So if we don't get East, then obviously I'm gonna look silly. But right now, I've got a different feeling. I feel like something's rumbling in the background, and I think Isak will be joining Liverpool very, very soon. He says, tell us about Rodrigo. How good is he? And is he better than Diaz? Can you imagine? Isak, Salah, Rodrigo reverts behind him. That could cause absolute mayhem for other teams. I'll speak about Rodrigo very, very shortly. So that is something on my agenda today. So hold fire. We'll talk about that in more detail. But before we do it, let's quickly talk about Luis Diaz. Now, earlier this morning, Bayern Munich actually placed an official bid of 67.5 million euros, which equals to 58.5 million pounds. But Liverpool rejected the bid immediately and said that he's not for sale. So, what is Liverpool's stance on the player? As he clearly wants to leave, he's voiced it out numerous times. He's already told people that he has been in discussions with other clubs. So, what are Liverpool doing? Are they waiting for the right offer, or are they waiting for a Saudi team to come into the mix because they would definitely pay over the odds? I feel like with Diaz, they're trying to play the smart game right now. They're trying to get as much money for him as possible in terms of the transfer fee because there's definitely interest for the player. We've got Barcelona who placed a bid a few weeks ago. You've got Bayern Munich placing a bid today and may come back with an improved offer, remains to be seen. But we also know there's strong interest from the Saudi Pro League. So they will be willing to spend above and beyond I think in terms of the valuation, we've stated that we wouldn't accept a bid or close enough to 100 million euros, which I'm just about to do the conversion, which would be 86 million pounds. So I think if a club offers us around 75, 80 million, Liverpool will accept it. I think that is the ballpoint of the figure that they want from Luis Diaz. And it's a funny one because I want the player to stay. I really do. I really rate Luis Diaz. But over the last couple of weeks, he's been a bit, too vocal for my liking. He's mentioned in press conferences that he's had discussions with other clubs. You're not really supposed to reveal that sort of stuff because, from a legal point of view, the clubs should make official approach or bids with another club. It's a club to club basis, not player to club and all that sort of stuff. So that's been a bit of a okay. Not really pleased with what you've said, but all right, you've been honest there, but it doesn't put a good light in terms of how you're communicating yourself. And there's also been unofficial news that he's actually handed in a transfer request, so he clearly wants to leave. Now, just to put ourselves in his shoes, I understand his frustration because he's been one of our sort of main starters in our team and has been for the last few years. But in terms of what he's earning, it doesn't reflect his work and his output. He's earning around 55K a week, which I think in terms of the annual salary becomes around 2.8. And there's other squad players like Conor Bradley and Simicast that are earning more than him. So he has every right to be frustrated in that regards. But from a business point of view, Liverpool won't be willing to, break the wage bracket, or should I say, they wouldn't want to offer biggest sort of, salary increases to a player that's in 28, 29 years of age. And I feel like that is literally their stance right now. We've made an exception with Mohamed Salah and Virgil van Dijk, but with Luis Diaz, maybe they think he's easily replaceable. So therefore, they don't feel like he deserves a new contract. In my opinion, I think he does deserve a new contract. I'd rather keep him than sell him on. Even if we keep him for another year or two, if we sign him on a new 1 or 2 year contract extension, it maintain his value for next summer if we wanted to, part ways with the player. Right now, it's a bit of a tricky one because I think Diaz wants to stay in Europe. He doesn't want to move to Saudi Arabia, but he might be forced to move there, and not from the club. He'll be forced in terms of his sort of intentions right now because he's frustrated with Liverpool because he's not getting a increased salary or better contract terms. If that is his number one objective right now, then there's only one league that will offer you countless amount of money, and that is the Saudi Pro League. So if money is your forefront in terms of your thinking and what you desire right now, then you might as well go to Saudi Pro League. That's the one where you'll get a big paycheck. And who knows, you can always come back to Europe. You're still quite young to do that. So it depends on, his sort of stance right now. If it's all about money, he might as well just go to Saudi and earn that big paycheck. If he wants to, stay in Europe and have ambitions, maybe stay at Liverpool for another year. He's still got 2 years remaining in his contract. Play for another season and then, evaluate your situation next summer and decide where you want to move from there onwards. So it's a funny one. I want him to stay, but I think he'll end up leaving. Where we'll end up, I don't see him in Europe. I think he'll end up in Saudi. That would be my bet, or well, I don't bet, but that would be my prediction for the Colombian winger. So let's see what happens. But if he stays, I'll be pleased because I do rate him as a player. Um, and I feel like we can kind of focus in other positions and try and engineer a complete squad and challenge for all titles next summer. So for me, that'll be very important. But feel free to let me know in the chat what you think. Would you keep Diaz or would you sell Diaz this summer and try and use that money to maybe strengthen other areas in the squad? Feel free to let me know. And look, I've got a picture of Richard Hughes again. For me, he's showing, you know, his gangster right now in terms of his way of dealing because if we don't get the money that we're asking for, we'll have Diaz for another year, and for me, that doesn't change anything. We still have a quality player in our hands. So Richard Hughes is making the moves right now. He's acting like a real G right now in terms of holding out for the right valuation. He's rejected bids straight away. He hasn't, you know, thought about it with his team and thought, is that a good offer? Maybe we can make it work. It's not what we want, but we can make do with it. For me, he's doing the right things. He's holding out. He's being firm in terms of what we see is the right offer for Diaz, and we value him around 86 million pounds. So if people want to acquire his services, they have to pay up and show us the money. It's as clear as day. So let's see what happens with Diaz, but it'll be very, very intriguing to see where he ends up. Before I move on, just got a couple more comments here. Raji Painting says, Aussie, Newcastle are stuck. Isak has told him he wants to leave. He wants LFC. That's why Newcastle want Ekitike, and Isak's agent has told Liverpool, make your move now. That's clearly it. I don't think Liverpool would have, you know, approached Newcastle if there wasn't any inkling from Isak that he wants to join Liverpool. So clearly there's been some discussions between the player and the agency that he wants to leave Newcastle and he wants to join Liverpool because Liverpool are the only team right now showing real interest in signing his services and probably be the only club out there that can afford him. So, you know, that's why I'm saying I've got this feeling that we will end up signing Isak. The writing seems to be on the wall and he seems destined to become a Liverpool player at some point. So probably thinking a bit too far ahead, but you've got to have strong hopes, and hopefully, you know, we get the striker that we've all been wanting to have, and hopefully, Isak is the man that comes through the door. Um, just got another comment from Mazzy. Big up Mazzy. He says, "What's the latest news on Darwin Nunes?" I'll be speaking about Darwin Nunes very, very shortly. So just hold fire on Darwin Nunes for now. But just wanted to speak on Federico Chiesa. So it's been reported that Chiesa may be staying at Liverpool for another season, and he could be utilized as a striker more so than a winger. So my thoughts on this new role for the Italian attacker. It's an interesting thought and an interesting sort of utilizing Chiesa because I feel like last year whenever he played, he did a decent job on the right and playing at left wing at times as well. But maybe playing a bit more central, soon he'll have a bit more freedom to roam around. He'll be able to find pockets and find himself in good goal scoring positions. The goal against Newcastle in the Carabao Cup final, I know we lost, but for me, that showed his instinctive play where the first touch was exquisite and the finish was just as good as well. So for me, it's definitely a position that he can play. Whether it's his prime position, that remains to be seen. But I do believe and I do think that we should keep Chiesa for another year. If he's willing to stay, then I think that will definitely be uh, a worthy option for us. Due to the unfortunate passing of Diogo Jota, we have to be very smart in terms of who we keep and who we sell. In terms of Darwin Núñez, he's been there for 3 years, so I feel like his writing is on the wall to depart from the club. With Chiesa, I feel like he brings versatility for us. So even if he's listed as, a backup striker, he can easily play left wing, he can play right wing. So for me, he gives us options and he has end product. He is a quality player. For him, it's more so just maintaining his fitness and staying injury free. That is his sort of main focus going into next season. So for me, I think this would be a smart decision to keep Chiesa for another season and utilize him as a striker. If we sign Isak and if you got Chiesa as your backup, I'm all for it. We've also been linked with Mateta, so if we were to get Isak and Mateta, then yeah, we're laughing right now. But with Chiesa on the books as well, I feel like he can definitely be a good cover for Isak. If Diaz stays, then that's another option for the striker role. So we've got decent players, we've got decent output for players, to have an impact on the team in that central role up top. So for me, it would be a smart move to keep Chiesa for another season. Whether it happens or not still remains to be seen, as he has desires to be in the Italian squad for the World Cup next year. So he may want to move back to Serie A at some point. But who knows? We'll see what happens with Chiesa. But for me, I'll be all on board to keeping him for another season. Uh, as I mentioned a comment earlier on in terms of Rodrigo. So that is the current rumor right now, where Liverpool are expected to enter the race to sign out of favour attacker Rodrigo from Real Madrid. Now, my thoughts on the rumor: I don't think he'll be a signing that we make straight away. It would be based on if someone leaves the club, i.e., if Luis Diaz leaves, then I think Rodrigo will be identified as a possible replacement. But my only thoughts on Rodrigo, I think he's a little bit overrated. I don't rate him very, very highly. I'm not saying he's terrible or he's pants or anything to that nature. I think he's a good player, but I don't think he's, in that bracket of being an elite player. Not yet, anyway. Still very young. He can achieve that sort of goal at some point in his career. But right now, I don't see him in that elite bracket. Mainly because, he's not a first teamer where he's in and out of the team. He's also playing on the right side, which apparently isn't his favorite position. He generally likes to play on the left wing. So that might be why, we're not seeing the best of Rodrigo in a Real Madrid shirt. But at the same time, it's very evidently clear that he's not wanted at the club. He's very rarely participated in the Club World Cup competition. So it's very clear that Alonso doesn't favour him, and maybe it's time for him to move on. The only thing about Rodrigo, he's made some comments about Salah. I think it was a couple of years ago in regards to taunting him in the Champions League Cup final. That sort of stuff I don't really like, because for me it shows his character that he's a bit of an idiot as well. So Liverpool, whenever they do sign players, they do these sort of background checks in terms of how they are from a personal point of view, how they are in terms of adapting to new squads and new surroundings and all that sort of stuff. So let's see in terms of what happens with Rodrigo. In terms of left wingers available, he'll probably be top of the list because of where he's playing and what he's produced over the years. Me personally, I don't rate him very highly. If Luis Diaz was to be sold, my favorite player, or the player that I would like us to sign, is Barcola from PSG. I mean, he's the one that has a very, very high ceiling. Some Liverpool fans will want Anthony Gordon. I'm definitely not in that boat. But if Rodrigo comes, don't get me wrong, I'll be satisfied with the signing, but I won't be overjoyed. When we signed Verts, I was overjoyed when we signed Verts. If we sign Isak, I don't have a word to describe how I feel about Isak joining the club. So for me, if he signs, I'll be like, good player. Me personally, I still have reservation. I'm not completely sure of his quality. But what I do know is if Rodrigo does become a Liverpool player, other teams are definitely gonna, shit their pants even further, because he's a high profile player. So they're probably thinking Rodrigo, Verts, Salah, Isak, and then you've got Chiesa in the mix as well. Like Gakpo, Diaz, like all of these players, they're thinking, how are we going to manage to compete with Liverpool? They've got real players all across the field. So, he'll definitely add that fear factor because, of his past and in terms of, what he's produced for Real Madrid. But he just wouldn't be my top choice. And look, if he was to join and switched it up and became the player that a lot of people do see in him, I'm all for it. But just not my personal choice. So that's just what I feel about Rodrigo. One thing I can say though, that if he does join Liverpool, he will probably play more so on the left than the right. But there will be occasions that he will play right wing to cover Salah, i.e., when he goes to AFCON, or if he's need of a rest, or we're rotating here and there. So if he's very strong in terms of wanting to play only left wing, and would throw a bit of a fuss if he went onto the right side on a couple of occasions, then for me, I would question his mentality. I would question his way of thinking, because this is a team sport. It's not all about you. So if you're thinking I want to play left wing and that's the only position I want to play, but you're not willing to help the team out if we've asked you to play in a different position because we're short in that area, or we feel like you're going to be impactful on that side against a certain opposition, then for me, there's no point of having that type of player in your squad. I don't want a player that has that kind of arrogance in a negative way, because I feel like it can affect the morale of the squad as well when you've got a player like that. So for me, everyone has to be on the same page, all fighting for the same cause. And if he's throwing a big fuss about playing out of position at times, then for me, he's not the right profile. So let's see what happens with the Rodrigo deal. But I don't think it'll be a deal where we're making a bid anytime soon. A player like Luis Diaz will need to depart in order for us to make that move. So let's see what happens in regards to Rodrigo. Just got a few comments here before we move on to the next rumor. Raju Painting says Aussie Newcastle are stuck. Isak has told them he wants LFC. That's why Newcastle want Ekitike and Isak's agent have told Liverpool make their move. I think I read that earlier on. So yeah, big up yourself for that. Azrak says Chiesa is a world class player. He deserves another season at Liverpool. Also, he can play anywhere in the front three. Completely agree with you, Azrak. That's why I think we should keep him for another season. Over the years, he has shown his quality. On his heyday, he's probably one of the best wingers in world football. And that's not me exaggerating. That's not me being biased because he's a Liverpool player. You know, look at the footage from a few years ago. He was one of the best players in world football at left wing and even at right wing because he played right wing for most of his career. So for me, he'd be a fantastic player to have in our squad. And in terms of, from a personal point of view, seems like a very likable player. Seems to have bonded very well with the squad. So it's good to have that kind of positive figure within the changing room. So I feel like, I'm not just saying, we should keep him for vibes or anything like that, but he definitely seems like a player that, will definitely give his all when called upon. And I think he will get game time. Last year it was more of a transitional period for him where he was getting used to a new culture, new country, new lifestyle, new atmosphere. Everything was brand new for him. And on top of that, unfortunately, he picked up a couple of injuries. He got ill. I think he had COVID as well around November, December time. So of course that hampered his sort of involvement within the squad. And of course, when you have that kind of illness, it can take a bit of time to get accustomed to the league, but also getting back to your 100% self as well. So for me, he's had that settling in period and should be raring to go next season. So for me, I would like him to stay for one more season. It looks like it could be the case because I've not heard much rumors or many talks from other clubs. One of the teams that wanted to sign him was actually Napoli, but they've actually signed Noah Long from Red Bull Leipzig today. So that's a player that's pretty much that left winger that they were trying to recruit to replace Kvaratskhelia, who of course joined PSG in January. So they've already assigned an attacker. They're on the verge of signing a striker as well, which we'll speak about very shortly. So Napoli won't be the team that will be in the market for Chiesa. Because AC Milan, maybe they'd want to sign someone, but they were probably preparing Rafael Leao to leave and join another club. He looks like he's staying there for another year at least. So for me, it makes sense for him to stay another year. And this talk that he wants to get into the Italy squad, he can still do that at Liverpool. He might not play week in, week out, but I feel like if he contributes to the team, to winning matches, then you're definitely going to be a positive influence. Whether he's a starter for Italy or not really our concern, if I'm being honest with you. But from a Liverpool point of view, if you give your all, that quality will be outshined to the world. And of course, whoever is selecting the team for Italy will make that decision to include Chiesa next summer. So for me, his focus should be club football. And then other than that, whatever happens, happens. But I feel like he has a lot of quality to be selected for Italy squad. And I feel like for Liverpool, he can be very impactful for us next season. Uh, Mazzy says Rodrigo is a talented player, but if it's your choice, who would you pick, Anthony Gordon or Rodrigo to play left wing for Liverpool? Great question, Mazzy, because I don't rate neither player very, very highly. So definitely got to think about this one. I'd go for Rodrigo, to be honest with you. I think Rodrigo has a little bit more about him. I feel like he has better end product in comparison to Anthony Gordon. I can also play right wing, can play as a striker if required. So as that versatility that we probably need in our squad. So I think Rodrigo would be the player that I'd go for. I know a lot of fans will disagree and say that maybe Anthony Gordon would be a better fit because He's Premier League proven. He's a Scouser. He's a boyhood red, and I don't think he's good on the right side. He played a few times for Newcastle, wasn't as effective in my opinion, but could be a decent option for Liverpool. But for me, yeah, I'd probably go for Rodrigo. I think he edges it for me. And they're both available for around the same kind of fee, 70, 80 million pounds. So I'd go for Rodrigo because I think he has a higher ceiling in comparison to Anthony Gordon. But let me know in the chat what you think. Who would you pick out of Anthony Gordon or Rodrigo? Azrak says, yes, I agree with you about Rodrigo, but maybe if we sign him, he'll take his game to another level. He could do. Apparently, Arne Slot is an admirer of the player. So if that is the case, then I'm supporting Arne Slot in regards to signing Rodrigo. But in terms of what I've seen, I've not been too impressed with him, if I'm being brutally honest. Maybe it's because that Real Madrid and people overhype certain players at times. Maybe that sort of perception or that reputation has, affected my judgment because I don't feel like he's that as good as what people make out. So for me, he's good, but he's not in the elite category. I don't put him in that category, but that's just my opinion on the player. And then we've got Roger Painting who says, if we sign Isak, who do you think will get more goals, Salah or Isak? Great question. I think they'll be neck and neck. And I'm not just trying to be around the bush. And the reason I say it'll be neck and neck is because with our fullbacks in Kirkes and Frimpong, especially Frimpong, because obviously he's playing on the right side, I see Salah inverting a lot more and being in more goal scoring opportunities in comparison to last season. For me, last season he was probably given instructions to be more of a creator than a goal scorer, just to add, a different sort of ammunition from that right hand side. And with Trent, in and out of the team, but also playing more inverted, we lack that creativity because he's gone inside. So if you've got someone a bit more out wide, like what Salah did last season, he, produced those favela passes and all sorts and was producing, exquisite balls for our attackers. Unfortunately, our attackers just weren't on par and weren't finishing some of the chances. But if I had to pick a name, I'd go for Isak because he's the striker, because he will be the focal point. But Salah won't be too far away. So that would be my prediction there. Ozan Kabak, big up yourself. He says, yes, big up the man. Ozzy, big up yourself, Ozan Kabak. Thank you for your comment and thank you for tuning in. Azrak says, yes, Rodrigo over Gordon all day. Yep, I totally agree with that as well. On to the next rumor. Now, crazy rumor circulating yesterday in regards to Vinicius Jr. And apparently, Liverpool are interested in signing Vinicius Jr. for £130 million. Now, let's not be around the bush. £130 million on Vinicius Jr. makes no sense because that money should be used on a striker, i.e., Alexander Isak. So we're not going to sign two players of that valuation. So if it was between the two, I'm going for Isak all day long. And secondly, I don't think we need a left winger if Diaz was to stay, for example. I know if Diaz leaves, then of course, that's why we're talking about Rodrigo. But if Diaz leaves, I don't expect Vinicius Jr. to be the player that comes in just because of the transfer fee involved. 130 million would be a lot of money. And also his salaries would be, off the roof, probably would earn more than Mohamed Salah, which might not bode well within the squad. So for me, financially, doesn't make sense. And also, I'm not here to be rude or to body shame anyone, but I feel like he's put on a bit of weight in recent times. And what I saw of him in the Club World Cup, he looked very slow. He didn't look as dynamic as he used to be. Very sluggish on the ball, not as impactful as he used to be. I'm not saying he's fallen off or anything to that nature, but I don't think he's as dynamic as he was 2, 3 years ago. So I don't want us to sign a player who I feel like it might be on a slight decline and sign a player who we don't really need right now. For me, we need to sign a number 9. And then whatever happens with Diaz will happen, and then we'll try and find a replacement then. But you can't expect to sign Isak for 120, for example, and then get Vinicius Jr. and it ends up being 250 with we're in no place to spend that kind of money. That's just a crazy amount of money there. So for me, this isn't even a realistic deal. And I just feel like it's just a journalist trying to get some clicks and views on their tweets or their articles. And yeah, he's got attention, but we can smell nonsense from afar away. And I definitely think this is a lot of rubbish. On to the next rumor. And this is the question that Mazzy asked earlier. What is the latest news on Darwin Núñez? So there has been some development um, in regards to Darwin Núñez, and unfortunately, it looks like his move to Napoli is off. Fabrizio Romano did tweet earlier on today. So let me bring up for you guys. So the tweet is Napoli have informed Liverpool tonight that Darwin Núñez deal can be considered off. Napoli will sign Luca as new striker despite Núñez opening doors to the move. Fee considered too high. Núñez still expected to leave LFC this summer, with Saudi clubs more keen. So, in terms of this move, it's definitely not happening because of our valuation. I'm not sure what we gave them as our sort of ballpoint mark, but I think we definitely wanted at least 50 million. That would have been the European price. In terms of the Saudi price, let's add another 30 million on top because they will be willing to spend big on signing a talent like Darwin Núñez. And in terms of Napoli's position, they thought he was, the valuation was unrealistic for them, and therefore they've moved on and identified another target. And that target is Lorenzo Luca, who is the striker from Udinese. So a verbal agreement is in place. The package includes a 9 million pound, or should I say 9 million euro loan fee with a 26 million euro obligation buy um, to buy the player with add-ons. So if you add that, that's 35 million euros. So that's about 30 million pounds. So you pretty much saved about 20 odd million and signed another striker. I'm not too familiar in terms of Lorenzo Luca. I've not seen much of him in action, but it looks like he's a player that they've identified as a player that they feel like could be an alternative option for Darwin Núñez. So unfortunately for Darwin Núñez, like it looked like he had his heart set on a move to Napoli. Doesn't look like it's going to happen. So the big question is, what happens with Darwin Núñez now? Could Saudi be the next destination for Núñez, or does he have a future at the club and maybe Liverpool can keep him on for another season? For me personally, the latter is not an option. I think he needs to leave Liverpool this summer. I think we've had enough time to embed Nunes to the team, and it just hasn't worked. I feel like he would be better utilized in a league that's played at a slower pace. And I think that's when you get the best of Darwin Nunes. And earlier on today, Fabrizio Romano did tweet saying that top clubs make initial approach to sign Darwin Nunes while he's been waiting for Napoli for 1 month. Napoli close to signing Luca as new striker. It was Darwin's favorite destination. Saudi clubs prepared to tempt him again after the deal was closed in January. So one of the teams that's interested in Darwin Núñez is Al Nassr, and they are currently managed by his former manager in George Jesus, who managed Benfica with Darwin Núñez as the main striker in that team. So he probably played his best football under that manager. So that could be a potential club for Diaz to reunite with his former coach and possibly play his best football or show a good account of themselves in the Saudi Pro League. So that could be a team that is a possibility of him to join. And Al Nassr will pay the big bucks. I can see us getting around 70, 80 million pounds, which would be a huge help in terms of financing the Isak deal. But of course, money can also be used in other areas of the squad as well. So for me, like I mentioned about Diaz earlier on, if money is the main objective in terms of earning a new contract, then go over to the Saudi league. You'll play a league that will be a little bit easier in comparison to the European leagues, respectively. but it will still be playing at a high level because there's a lot of big talent going over to the Saudi Pro League. So it could be a league that becomes more exciting as time goes on, but also, you'll be earning so much money that it will settle you for your life after football as well, which, has to be put into consideration. So a big decision for Darwin Núñez as well as Luis Diaz in terms of their future. If I was to keep one, it would definitely be Luis Diaz. Darwin Núñez for me has to leave Liverpool this summer. It's not really an option because if we sign Isak, Darwin Núñez on paper could be a good backup, but for me, I feel like that ship has sailed and we need to move on and look at other options. So that would be my thinking about Darwin Núñez. And that is the last rumor. But I see there's a few comments there. So let's go through some of the comments before we close the show. Maziv, the comment here says, if Newcastle remains stubborn on Isak, would you settle for Ekitike or do you want Richard Hughes to get Isak to force the move through? I think in terms of the latter of that comment, I wouldn't like a club to force a move because I feel like karma is a thing and that could always backfire with us in the future. But there would have been discussions from Richard Hughes and Isak's camp. And maybe, Isak would have said politely that, look, that's the club I want to join. So, please try and make it happen. So it just depends on, how it's communicated to the club. But the feeling that I'm getting is that Newcastle already know that Isak's not going to sign a new contract and he wants to move. So they're trying to play in a different way where they're trying to find a replacement first, and then Isak will be free to move on. But they won't, communicate out there that he's available because it just puts their sort of stock down as well in terms of being a well-run club. Because if you're willing to just sell your big assets like that, then in the future, other teams will try and get one of your best players and feel like it'll be an easy job because of the way they communicate it to the world, with regards to Isak and Liverpool. So for me, I think let's say, let's go to your comment there. Let's say Newcastle are very, very stubborn and they don't want to sell the player to Liverpool, and somehow the player's like, do you know what? It's fine. I'll stay for another year, see how it goes. Then let's unsettle them and go for Ekitike because that would have been the player that they wanted to have signed. So I'd be pleased with the Ekitike signing, but I will be disappointed at the same time because we're already in the motion that Isak is a possibility. So if we don't get it over the line, then that will hurt, in my opinion. So, but there aren't many short options out there in terms of top quality strikers, and Ekitike for me would be one that we have to go for. If Isak is not available, another option would be Sesko, but for me that is not a viable option. Mateta would be a smart, short sort of a stopgap signing. Maybe we can go for someone like that. Who knows? But it's going to be interesting. I would love for it to be Isak and Mateta. That would be the dream combo, honestly. I don't think they'll play together all the time, but having Isak leading the line, but then bringing on Mateta for like the last half an hour of a match, that would be sensational stuff. But let's see. Let's see what happens with regards to Isak. Hopefully, we'll get some developments in the coming days. Azrak says Vinny is washed up now. A few years ago, he was cooking, so let's pass on talking about him or taking about him. Yeah, I agree. I don't think he's that same type of player. Man says, Aussie, any news on Mark Gay? We need him because Canate is asking for wages near Van Dijk level, which Liverpool will not give. Same with Diaz, he's asking for 2 months to renew his contract. In terms of Diaz, I don't know what he's asking for. But in terms of Canate, it's a disappointing one, I can't lie, because I really had hoped that he would sign a new contract with us, but the more of these news circulate about Real Madrid being in the mix, I feel like he's just destined to go there. So that's why I've said it outright that if he's showing no sort of indication that he wants to sign a new contract, sell him this summer. There's no point of keeping him on board. I've been going back and forth about this in my head because I'm thinking, if he leaves, it doesn't help us because we lose a quality player in the squad. But at the same time, you don't want it to be disrespected. You don't want a player already thinking about the future and then in the end might not play to the highest of his capability. I want a player to be playing for with his best form on the pitch and fighting for the cause as well. So for me, if he's not 100% committed, then we have to part ways. As simple as that. Gay would be a decent replacement. I don't think he would be the adequate quality. He'd be a solid addition to our squad. But I still feel like Liverpool would need to sign another defender if Konate was to leave. So let's see what happens. We might be shocked and then he ends up signing a new contract. I really hope he does. That would be a fantastic, part of our transfer window, signing him on a new contract. But right now, I'm just not getting positive feelings that he will, which is a shame because I do really like the player. Ozan Kabak says, "How disappointed would you be, Ozzy, if Darwin ends up staying?" Honestly, I'd be quite disappointed, but it also depends who the other striker is in the squad. If it's Isak, then I wouldn't be too mad. If I'm being honest, I would be a little bit disappointed that he's still at the club. But we've got Isak, we've got the dream sign, we've got the dream striker that we wanted. So for me, I'd be pleased about that. And if Diaz stays as well, then I think it makes it better for me even more because if Isak's not available, then I would put Diaz as second choice ahead of Darwin Núñez, if that makes sense. On paper, Darwin Núñez would be second choice, but you know, I'd shift Diaz through the middle if he ends up staying for another season. But yeah, I wouldn't be overly pleased to say the least. If it was Mateta and then Darwin Núñez, yeah, that doesn't breed a lot of confidence for me. I rate Mateta, but Darwin Núñez as your backup option doesn't really sound like we're going for all titles as it doesn't sound like we're going for a full charge on trying to get as many titles next year. So for me, no, I wouldn't be very pleased if he was at the club next season. Roger Painting says, linked to Jean-Philippe Mateta, is it genuine or a smokescreen for somebody else? I think it's genuine. I think Liverpool are exploring different options, but I wouldn't regard him as a prime target. I think Liverpool are sort of testing the water to see who's available because if we can't get Isak, you know, Ekitike would probably be one of the options that we go for. But at the same time, because he's a young striker, maybe it would make sense to have an experienced striker on the bench, I am a Mateta. So then you have a good balance there. So if Ekitike doesn't fit the bill or doesn't live up to his reputation on a short term basis, then you can just add Mateta in the mix, and you'd hope that with time Ekitike improves and becomes a player that we all believe that he could eventually become in the future. So for me, that could be just us exploring a few options. I wouldn't mind him as a signing, to be fair, but if he's first choice, then I would find it a little bit of an underwhelming signing, if I'm being brutally honest. Um, On the comeback with the comment says, I just clocked it, Aussie. How would Ekitike feel now if that he knows he's second choice for Liverpool? Love your reminder. Yeah, that's definitely something we have to be very careful of because it's quite evident that he is second choice. Um, Everyone knows Isak has always been our number one target, but in football, these things can always be communicated differently to the player. So if we were to have discussions with Ekitike, and let's say we know Isak's not happening, we can just speak to Ekitike and say, look, we really believe in you. We believe that you have great potential. But if he's like, no, why didn't you go on and sign Isak then? We're like, well, we think you've got a higher ceiling. You're very young at this stage of your career. You're very similar in terms of how Isak plays, but you're probably better than Isak currently at your age than he was at that age as well. So there's always ways of trying to pitch it differently to a player. And you can always say that, look, forget what the media saying. That's just the media noise. this is what we envision for you. We want you to be the main striker for us for years to come, and that way that should entice the player to jump ship and sign for Liverpool. So Liverpool make it work. Don't worry. I'm just a content creator. I'm just talking a slight sales pitch, but they'll do it to a better magnitude, in my opinion. So if that's the case, I'm sure Liverpool can communicate that and try and get him over the line. Azrak says, "What a sensational time to be an LFC supporter. We just spent 116 million on Verts. Now we might spend 125 on Isak. All the other clubs must be jealous of us. We are ready to win most trophies next season." Completely agree with you. I generally feel like even now, where nothing's been made official, teams are concerned. When you've got Man City fans saying, "Oh, Liverpool are ruining football. They're spending so much money." Like, behave yourselves. You guys have been spending money left, right, and center for years. Even in the January window, they spent about 200 million pounds there. And they weren't even big players. Of course, Marmoush, I do rate him as a good player. The other guys, Kusanov and these players, they're not, world beaters or anything to that nature. So you have to be, you know, very deluded to think that, oh, Liverpool are ruining football. Other teams have been doing this for years and years. United were prime example of doing stuff like that. Chelsea have done that to Liverpool at times. I remember we tried to sign Mohamed Salah under Brendan Rodgers, and they bought Salah just to stop us from buying him. And unfortunately, that affected our season where we didn't win the league. We dropped points, and let's not talk about what happened in that season. But clubs push their weight around. They become the big bully in the playground, and Liverpool haven't done that, but they're doing it a little bit now. And look, I'm all for it. I'm enjoying this kind of new energy, this new way of life right now from Liverpool because we're moving like a big club. So I could not care less what rival fans say. Rival fans will always have something to say in regards to Liverpool, good or bad. More so good, more so bad than good, to be fair. But they're always going to complain. Arsenal fans will say, I read a tweet earlier today. I should have saved it, but there's a fan who suggested that Arsenal is a checkbook manager because he was presented with $1 billion squad. You can't spend £1 billion. What are you talking about? So for me, absolute nonsense in terms of what certain fans say on social media. That's what I'm saying. When you're on social media, just take things with a pinch of salt because a lot of things I see really irks me, but I just refuse to respond or communicate with them because it's just people being idiots. And as we go through the comments, you realize they're just trolling. So, always take it with a pinch of salt. But fans are worried. Fans in the Premier League are worried. Even across Europe, I'm telling you, they are worried because signing foreign verts for me is probably the best signing of this window, but Isak will literally be on par. And Liverpool made both of those signings in the same window. So, we're talking big business right now. We're trying to be big heavyweights right now. We're trying to knock everyone out at some point. And I feel like we could definitely challenge for all the titles. The squad will definitely need to be, you know, addressed in terms of adding the right quality in the defense. I think another midfielder will just solidify my prediction or my thinking going into next season because I feel like we've got good players in the midfield with the likes of McAllister, Gravenberch, Endo, and Jones. But I feel like there needs to be one more just to complete that mix, and then you can add, your Bajtits but I think Bajtit might leave to be fair, but your McConnells and those type of players, that's about six midfielders for a double pivot. So you got plenty of quality there, good mix there. Endo with the experience, Jones, multifunctional, can play in a six, can play in an eight, can play as a 10. And then you've got Gravenberg and McAllister, the first names on the team sheet. So for me, just add that and one more player. Yeah, it just strengthens us, and then you can rotate Gravenberg and McAllister a lot more, which I feel like we didn't do enough, especially with Gravenberg. He looked very fatigued and jaded towards the latter stages of last season. So he needs to be, rotated at times, not because of bad form or anything, but just certain games, we might not need to play Gravenberg, maybe rest him for an upcoming Champions League tie, or we've got a bigger tie next week in the Premier League. So just read the room, analyze what fixtures we've got coming up, and then take it from there. So this season coming up, I really hope that we have such a complete squad that Arne Slot rotates a lot more. He has voices in the past that he did make some errors in regards to rotating. Maybe he should have done a bit more. But if he's got the players that he wants in his squad, then he's not going to hesitate. There's a few players that he's still a bit unsure of, but I think those players will probably move on this summer. So if he gets a squad that he feels that is to his standard and is a complete squad, then you know rotation will be happening. But in terms of the levels, when you rotate some players, it won't be a huge drop off, which is such an exciting time for us. It really is. So exciting times, as you said, as well, to be a Liverpool fan, and hopefully we can add some more bodies and officially say that this is the best transfer window of Liverpool's history. I feel like we're on the verge, and it probably is there right now. But once the window's closed, then we can stamp on it and say this is the best window ever. So let's see how the window concludes for us. Ozzy Kamak says, not gonna lie, that was a good sales pitch, Ozzy. Thank you, appreciate it. Not really a salesman, but that would be my thinking. That's what I would do, in that situation, because you've got to show the player that he's the guy. Forget what you hear on the papers, like it's all paper talk. We're in the room right now. Let's talk. You're the guy that's going to take us forward. You're the young striker that we've been looking for. That's why we haven't signed anyone else. But you're the one that we want. So, you've got to show that belief. You've got to show that passion. You've got to show that want for that player. And then he will feel like $1 million. That's why you've got certain players in history where, Jose Mourinho would sign certain players, and at other clubs they wouldn't have performed. But for him, they would run through a brick wall. Same as Jurgen Klopp. Some players that we've signed over the years, when they've moved on from Liverpool, they haven't replicated that same form. Jurgen Klopp just energizes and motivates players. And I feel like that's what Arne Slot would do. He might not be as charismatic or energetic like Jurgen Klopp, but even, for example, Florian Wirtz, he presented the project to him and he was blown away by it. So Arne Slot can do it through his sort of personality in terms of his charisma, but he can do it from a football point of view, from showing tactics and showing his philosophy and his vision for the team and for um, the club for years and years. So that's the way to do it. So if Ekitike is the guy, I'd be pleased with the signing. But we all know Isak is the dream, and it could be a reality. This only time will tell if we get Isak or not. Man said, if we sign Isak for 120 million and we've already got Verts, which player do you think has the best chance to win the Ballon d'Or for Liverpool? Verts or Isak? Very, very interesting question. I'd probably say Isak because of him being a striker, and that's very sort of put in a simplistic way. But with Ballon d'Or, it tends to be the striker that gets the individual accolade there. But if Florian Wirtz has a sensational season where he's produced magical performances and his goals and assist ratios, then he's in there as well. But if Isak is the gunman that we believe he is and he's firing a lot of goals and we win the quad, for example, you look at the main striker. That's just how football is. So I'd probably go with Isak in regards to that scenario. Bonkers LFC, big up yourself. He says, breaking news, and this is from at Build. He says, Vincent Company has had a video call with Luis Diaz. The Colombian said yes to Bayern and informed Liverpool of his desire. Now the clubs have to agree a fee within Bayern. Okay. If that is the case, show us the money, Bayern. That's all we're going to say. Because we pretty much hijacked that bet still. They thought they were going to get that player and they were willing to spend around 70, 80 million pounds. So we know they've got the finances. So they're just being a bit tight. They're not wanting to, spend all their money on one player. And we also know that they had other targets in mind after we assigned Verts. They were linked with Rafael Leao, they were linked with Mitoma, they were even linked with Cody Gakpo for around 70, 80 million pounds. So they're clearly willing to spend that money on a left winger. And with Musiala, unfortunately, picking up an injury in the Club World Cup, they are even more desperate to acquire an attacking player in their team. So it's all good, offering 58 million, up the offer a little bit more. up it up to about 75, 80 million, and then we'll talk business. So it's all good, them having video calls and Lucho saying yes, but at the end of the day, you got to show us the money. It's all good doing these kind of private discussions, but at the end of the day, if you don't meet the club's valuation, no player is moving from anyone. So let's see. I think there will be some developments with regards to this move. Um, I would just hope he goes to Saudi because then we can get that deal over the line quicker. Bayern, I feel like are going to haggle a little bit. They're going to probably bid 65 and then 870, and it's going to be slowly done. But look, pay us the money. If you want Diaz that badly, pay the valuation cost that we have or the valuation fee that we regard with regards to Diaz, and then yeah, we'll talk business. So let's see what happens in regards to Diaz and Bayern Munich. As I said, we've watched other clubs spending big money for years now. It's our time to move like the biggest club in the country. We deserve to sign these big boy players. 100% agree. As well, couldn't have said it better there. And Ozan Kovacic, I feel that Lucho is gone. Honestly, I do as well, Ozan. Yeah, it's not a nice feeling because of the way he's been talking behind the scenes. We spoke about this privately as well. Um, to say out loud that you've had discussions with other club, that doesn't sit well with me. His dad's been twerking for Barcelona over the years. That doesn't sit well with me either. Eh, I get it in terms of he's not getting what he financially what he deserves, but there's probably other ways around it. You're playing for one of the best clubs in the world right now. If he moves over to Bayern, like, have you really upgraded? I'm not being disrespect to Bayern Munich. They are one of the biggest clubs in Europe. In terms of their league, they're probably strong contenders to win the league every year. But in the Champions League, I think Liverpool are ahead of Bayern Munich in terms of the pecking order, in terms of quality and what we bring to the table. So look, it depends on Lucho. He'll go over there, he'll get probably double the pay rise at least, or maybe triple the pay rise. And he gets the money he wants. He plays for an established European team that will challenge for the league and for Europe. So maybe it's a win-win for Luis Diaz. And yeah, that is the one that you're thinking maybe it will happen. I feel like Saudi will probably be in the mix at some point. And maybe they'll place a bid and we will accept it. And then that will put pressure on Bayern too much. And if they don't, he has to go to Saudi because he seems to be all about his money right now. So let's see what happens. But I do agree with you, Ozan Kabak. I do think he is gone, uh, which is not nice. But let's see what happens because there are a lot of options out there for the left wing. But I don't know if those players are available. The likes of your Barcolas, your Nico Williams. Nico Williams has just signed a new contract with Bilbao. Barcola hasn't signed a new contract, but I do see him extending his stay there. I think PSG will be foolish to sell him at this point. And who else do we have? Anthony Gordon. For me, that's a that's a no go. Um, Rodrigo could be an option. Not my favorite option, but it is an option. To be fair, is he an upgrade on Diaz? Let me know in the chat if you think Rodrigo is an upgrade to Diaz. I'd probably say he's not. Maybe because I've got accustomed to watching Diaz and I know what he brings to the table, and I have a slight uncertainty with Rodrigo because I see a good player there, but I don't know if he's going to reach a new level if he was to join Liverpool. So that's just my sort of question marks around Rodrigo. But in terms of the market, he'll probably be one of the best options, if I'm being honest. So remains to be seen what happens. I feel like we need to get Isak through the door first. Get the striker through the door, and if Diaz wants to leave, then we can kind of assess the market a little bit better. Um, I watched the clip earlier on. I haven't watched the full clip on YouTube, but there's an inside training video on the Liverpool channel. So I'm definitely watching this after I conclude the stream. And I saw a little segment of Rio going past Gravenberch and ping pong with complete ease, and then he ends up scoring in terms of the training drill there. But look, he's a player that could be fast tracked to the first team. I said it in the watch along against Preston. for me, the talent is there. I don't need to allude in terms of how talented the boy is, but I want us to be a bit patient as well. I don't want us to put too much pressure on him to deliver. I feel like this season coming up, it would be the best time for him to refine those skills that he has, refine the tools, and play for the under 23s, where he'll be up against young players that are up and coming, but also some experienced players as well of high quality in terms of Premier League quality. And I think, see how he develops. And then let's say December, January, that's when we embed him to the team. But I wouldn't want to do it at the start of the season. I feel like that would be a bit of pressure for the young kid, in my opinion. So for me, we just have to manage expectations. But I do see him being involved in the cup games next season. And if he really, really delivers, then I can see him being involved in the first team. But then next summer, I think that will be his breakthrough season, in my opinion. So that's just me playing Mystic Oz there. But he looks impressive, and I see a lot of fans getting very excited, saying, "Look, forget Diaz. We've got the kid. Fast track him into the team." I get it, but I don't want to put pressure on the kid either at the same time. So let's see what happens. Yeah, exciting times. We've got a very special talent there, Enrio and Gomorrah. So let's see what happens. Um, Raju Painting says, Aussie, great show. Keep up the good work. We appreciate your dedication and insight on Liverpool Football Club. Appreciate your kind words there, Raju Painting. Thank you so much for your comment there. Ozan Kabak says, man, Rio makes it look easy, right? I see a breakout season. I see him breaking up, but I feel like next season will be the season where he kind of announces himself, where he's the guy. Like, it might even be, I don't want to put too much expectation out there, but it could be like where he becomes our Lamine Yamal, where he ends up being the first choice left winger from next season onwards. That's the kind of level I see. For me, he needs to work on certain things. He needs to make better decisions in terms of the final third. End product isn't there. That needs to be worked on. And I feel like he can refine that by playing for the under 23s. If he plays regularly for the first team, if he makes mistake, it could definitely affect his confidence, affect his development because, as excited as we are as Liverpool fans, there will be some sections of the fan base that will, you know, talk very negatively about the player, and that could, affect his confidence going forward. So you have to manage these young players very carefully, and we have to manage expectations for the fans as well. Because if he's in the first team fold, the saying is if you're old enough, you're good enough. So in that regards, whenever he's put in the team, we're expecting him to be 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 every game. It's not realistic. He's a 16-year-old kid. Let him grow into his body, let him, understand the game, let him improve his tactical awareness, let him improve, his skills, his, you know, way of playing and producing more and let him understand the game better. He's still very, very young in his development. So I got high hopes for him, don't get me wrong, but just got to manage him carefully. That's what I'm going to say. Mandy says Rodrigo is a good player, but Diaz is better than him now. But Rodrigo could become better than him in the future because he's still only 24. I agree with that comment. That's why I've said that, outrightly, I don't think Rodrigo is an upgrade now, but Rodrigo has a higher ceiling due to his age and his profile. So it could be where, we end up signing a better player in the future. But as of right now, and my thing right now for Liverpool is that I don't want to sign players that I'm unsure of. I want us to sign players that are ready made and that are established. That's why, in terms of the strikers, I've always said Isak. Isak has to be the guy because he's established. He's a gunman. He's been doing it for years at the Premier League, but also at previous clubs and international level as well. Ekitike is a player I really like, but then I've also said out loud that I wouldn't mind an Osimhen because of his experience. I wouldn't mind a Gyökeres because of his experience or his ability in front of goal. Of course, those players are moving on to different clubs now, so the options are limited now. Alvarez would have been an alternative, but he's not moving anytime soon. Then you have to venture into another market where, you know, well, there's probably one market before, which is the Premier League market. I guess that would be your Matetas or a Wissa from Brentford. And if they're not your right options, then you go to a different market where the young strikers, up and coming strikers. That's where you got your Ekitikes and your Seskos. And in that bracket, for me, the Ekitike is the one that is having that list. So if he was to join, then we'd be signing a striker that could potentially become one of the best strikers in world football for years to come. But he's still potential. I don't think he's the final product right now. So for me, I want us to sign established players going forward. That's the viewpoint that I have. So let's see what happens. Asrak has said Romano has just tweeted Liverpool ready to send a package of 120 million to Newcastle for Isak, and Ozan has said refresh for beats your refresh. Let me refresh. Give me a second. Oh my gosh. All right. That was 10 hours ago. So this is the tweet, guys. So Liverpool have again confirmed to Newcastle intention to present record bid for Alexander Isak as revealed on Tuesday. The proposal is ready for a £120 million package, but will only be sent if Newcastle change their stance. Always been not for sale. So this is definitely spiced it up a little bit. It's added a bit of a spark to this scenario. Oh, this is going to be interesting. Because if they say no, they know we're going to go for Ekitike. And it's a bit, can you really reject £120 million? Look, you can be as stubborn as you want, but I don't think you can reject that bid. That's a British transfer record fee. So you can't be like, oh, that's a small fee. Give us 130 million. There hasn't been another player that's been signed for that kind of price. So Ozan Kabak just said it in the comments as well. Newcastle cannot accept that offer. For me, they have to accept that offer. They really have to. That is an offer that won't happen all the time in the Premier League. I know we've got players that have been, bought for 100 million. You've got your Declan Rice, you've got your Grealish, Caicedo. But that's only three players there. That kind of figure point is not a regular occurrence that you buy players. The Grealish one was basically a release clause that Aston Villa never thought in a million years that anyone would match. But surprise, surprise, Man City, aka the fan base that are telling us that we're ruining football, spent big bucks like that years ago, you know, and pretty much surprised everyone with that Grealish bid because let's be honest, Grealish was never worth 100 million, never will be, in my opinion. So of course they all paid over the odds in that regards. Declan Rice has had a decent career at Arsenal so far, but I wouldn't classify him as £100 million player. Caicedo looking like he's living up to the bill, but paying 115 or 110, whatever the amount was, for a defensive mid seems a bit wild as well. So £120 million for a striker like Isak makes perfect sense. So for me, they can't reject that offer. They really can't. In terms of the package, that might be the discussion where they want more money up top. But if the complete package is 120 million, then they can't say anything. They really can't. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with this deal because I feel like they have no choice but to accept it. And that 120 million can be used on to sign Ekitike. I think they're trying to get him for around 70, 75 million pounds. So if they get him, they still have, let's say they get him for 70 million, they still have 50 million to sign another player. And we all know that they're in the market for a centre back. So they can easily sign a good centre back. They won't get Gabe because that's the player that we want, but they can go and sign another centre back. So, they of course they lose their star striker, but in my eyes, they signed a very adequate replacement in Ekitike, who's very similar stylistically with Isak, but also Ekitike is a player that they've been on a hunt for the last 2, 3 years as well. He was the player that they targeted before they actually signed Isak. So they definitely have high expectations, or they have huge admiration for Ekitike. So it's not like they're just signing anyone for the sake of it. This was a player that they wanted as a primary target when the Saudis took ownership of Newcastle United. So they end up getting a striker they wanted couple of years ago. We get the striker that we want. Everyone should be happy, right? That should be the scenario. So let's see what happens. But this one definitely sparks the news further now, because it looks like we've got an indication from Isak that he's ready to move. So therefore, we're ready to make that bid. And now we're going to see what Richard Hughes is made of, because he'll be you know smoking up that cigar like that picture earlier on I put up. Um, he'll be posing like this, where if he'll be waiting for Newcastle in terms of what move they make, because if they reject it, all right, fine, you rejected our bid, we'll get your primary target, Ekitike. So good luck having a striker that's not happy to be with you right now and had his eyes set on a move to us. So good luck. So look, we're playing like a big boy right now in terms of the football world, and yeah, it's about time, isn't it? So that's great news. I'm excited. Let's see what happens tomorrow. I'm sure we'll hear further developments. Uh, Back to the comments. The other comments say it's an offer they'll only get once in their history. Correct. These offers won't happen all the time. Man City have, of course, placed high bids for certain players over the years, but they don't always place £100 million bids every time for a player. Um, and it might get difficult as time goes on in terms of clubs meeting the PSR regulations, all that sort of stuff. So, you know, certain teams like Liverpool, your Man United, your Chelsea, they're able to generate revenue through, business deals, partnerships, merchandise, and all that sort of stuff. But other teams can't do that. Newcastle haven't done that yet, unfortunately. They have one of the wealthiest owners in world football, or in the world just altogether. Forget football for a second. But if the books aren't matching, the expenditure, then they can't just buy players left, right, and center. Otherwise, they'll have to, you know, face the consequences and get penalized in the future. So they're not going to just ruin it for the sake of it. So with this £120 million bid that's coming from Liverpool, that helps them even further. They get to recruit the players that they thought maybe wasn't possible due to finances. They're able to do that now. They're able to compete for a high finish in the Premier League, and they're able to compete in the Champions League next season. So Newcastle, they got to think smart now. They really do. They can't just be someone say, "Oh, we're not going to sell our best striker to you." Think of the bigger picture. It benefits Newcastle to sell Isak, in my opinion. Look at us as an example. We sold Coutinho, a Coutinho player that we really really loved in our club, but he showed antics that wasn't tasteful, and pretty much forced his move away from Liverpool. And because of that, he went on to move to Barcelona. And then look where his career is right now. He's at is it Vasco? I think he's at Vasco in Brazil, isn't it? He's at a Brazilian club now. So his career's gone downhill since then. So the picture's there. That money that we got from the Coutinho deal, us Liverpool fans play as a joke that we're still spending that Coutinho money because it's so much money, right? But we signed Van Dijk and we signed Allison, and the rest is history. So, if you can sell one of your star players, but be very smart with your recruitment, which I do believe Newcastle are, they are very calculated in terms of who they sign. They haven't made any poor signings that I can think of since the new ownership. Tonali has been a great signing for them. I really like the look of Lewis Hall, fantastic left back for me. Should be England's left back for years. That's how much of a talented player he is. Isak, the player we're trying to get, he was a fantastic signing for them. Gordon, not my cup of tea. I don't think he's that great, but still a good signing for a Newcastle team. So, you know, and Alanga's a fantastic player. I said to United fans a couple of years ago, they're going to regret selling Alanga, because I feel like he had better output than Anthony. And, here we are. Anthony got, they spent 85 on Anthony. He's only played his best football in the last few months, and that's for another club in terms of Real Betis. But United shirt, he's been woeful. So got to be very careful in terms of who you sign. You can't just sign names for the sake of it. Got to sign the right players for the right team and the right structure in terms of how a team plays their football. And I feel like they've got a good balance. They've got a good mix. If they add Ekitike, get a solid centre back, they will be challenging for top four. So gotta be smart. Let's see what happens with Newcastle. Do they accept this bid or not? Only time will tell. Kenny, big up. Kenny says 120 not enough. You can have Newcastle sloppy seconds. No, thank you. We don't want your sloppy seconds. Um, Mary says, Ozzy, what's your gut feeling? Will Newcastle take 120 or carry on playing the long game? I don't think they'll accept right away, but I can see them accepting 125. I think that would be the fee that they want to go with. They'd probably want 130, replace 120, and we'll meet in the middle. And I think we'll end up signing Isak for 125 million. That's my prediction there. So let's see what happens. Jenny says Isak is better than him. So why would you sell Isak? Isak's better than who? Ekitike. Yeah, he is. But you're signing. I'm assuming you're a Newcastle fan, Kenny. Um, you're signing Ekitike to replace Isak. It's just that your club have been smart and you're doing it the other way around, where you haven't sold the player before you find the replacement. You've got the replacement, and then you're selling the player. So only time will tell. Only time will tell. Um, Might say if they want Ekitike, then they better take 120 million, or we will take Ekitike from them. Facts. Either way, if you want to keep Isak, okay, that's fine. We'll get him next year. But for this summer, we're gonna get Ekitike. So play it how you want. That's how I see it. Kenny says I'm deluded. We will see, my friend. We will see. Um, Other Kabat says, come back to the stream, Kenny, when the season starts. And then Kenny says, I will come back to you this season when Isak pumps Liverpool's net. Well, Kenny, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. I think it's your first time on the show, so I appreciate you commenting. And yeah, feel free to come back. I won't be hiding. I'll be doing regular content throughout the season. So let's see what happens. Is Isak going to be a Newcastle player or Liverpool player? Only time will tell. But we'll soon find out, I guess. Raja Painting says Aussie 120 million for Isak is a good deal for Newcastle. They're going for 60 million. If I'm Isak and I know the champions of England want me, I am running to Anfield. He's probably running like he is in that picture right now, to be fair. And look, and I'm not just trying to be cheeky here and say, oh, Newcastle have to accept it. I think it makes a lot of sense for them to accept it. I feel like it actually helps them going forward. If they were to keep Isak, I don't think Ekitike will join. As much as Newcastle fans are saying that they're going to have both players as their strike force next season, I doubt it'll happen for a number of reasons. Number one, they're very similar in terms of how they play. So to have two similar strikers as your front two, if Newcastle decides to change formation, it's not going to work. It's not going to be a good balance in the team. Another alternative or another option would be where Isak's the main striker and Ekitike can play behind him as a number 10, which he can do, but that's not his natural position, in my opinion. Or Ekitike plays on the left wing, which is a position that he's played at PSG, played there in his previous club as well. Frankfurt has been more of a striker, but he has played left wing, in his younger days. So that wouldn't make sense for me either because for the last couple of years, he's established himself as a centre forward. He wouldn't want to revert and go back to playing as a left winger. And I feel like you're going to misuse him and not get the best out of Ekitike playing out of position. So from a football point of view, it doesn't even make sense to have both players, in my opinion. And rest assured, you're not going to have Isak and then have Ekitike as a backup. You're paying 70, 80 million pounds for backup. That's crazy as it is. So that's not something that I think, is on the cards in terms of the finances involved. 120 million. It helps you get Ekitike for 70 million, and then you can spending 50 million on signing another centre back, which I know is a position that needs to be strengthened at Newcastle. You know, you've already got Trafford, good goalkeeper, solid backup for Pope there. Alanga, definite first team player on that right wing, can play left wing if required. But then you've got Jacob Murphy, who's an adequate cover. I thought he was one of your best players last season. And on the left, you've got Anthony Gordon, you've got Harvey Barnes as well, and then you'll have Ekitike. I think you'll still sign another striker. I think there's been rumors suggesting that you may get Calvert-Lewin on a free transfer because um, who's the other striker? One of the strikers has parted way. I've forgotten his name now. Callum Wilson. He's just been released from his contract, so he's available on a free transfer. So they definitely need to add another striker to their squad. But in terms of the midfield, this midfield is very, very solid. They've got Jolinton, Ramirez, Tonali. So, you know, Longstaff, I believe, is going to Leeds United, but you know, there's still strength in depth. They still have the quality in that midfield. Backline, Livramento, a player I really rate. He's a fantastic player. You've got Lewis Hall, future left back for England. And then in terms of the defense, you've got Fabian Shaw, who played there predominantly, and then you've got Dan Burns. But then you can, you know, if you sign another player, you know, I'm not sure in terms of Botman if he's fit enough to return to the team again, but he's definitely an option if he's fit and ready. And then add another player to that mix. You've got a solid back line there. So look, I've just gone through the whole squad there. By signing Ekitike and another centre back, you've strengthened your squad and made it as complete as it can be right now. So it benefits Newcastle in the long term. So let's see what they decide in the end. If they keep Isak, I'm not saying it's going to be bad for them, but they might not be able to strengthen in other areas if they were to sell him. So we'll see what happens with regards to Newcastle's next move. Do they reject or do they accept the bid? Delulu Steve, big up Delulu Steve. He says Geordie's better pray before the season even starts. Yeah, some of the fans have been quite shameless, to be fair. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm sure we'll get further development and, you know, we'll quieten a lot of the fans in terms of what happens. But only time will tell. But that is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Great show today. Let me give a few shouts. Shout out to Mazzy, Double D, Azrak, uh, Rajib Painting, and then Ozan Kabak, of course. And then you've got Kenny, who came on, Newcastle fan base, so Bonkers LFC. And then you've got Deluded Steve as well. Big up for your comment there. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. In terms of upcoming content, I'm doing a members only show tomorrow, which will be the best worst 11 for Liverpool. So I'm going to have a selection of players that I regard as probably some of our worst signings and try and field the best team ability wise to form a good or decent 11. It's going to be a hard task, but I'll try my best. So if you'd like to watch the video, feel free to join our membership. We've got two packages available. We've got one which I like to refer to as the FTP champs. And that is, and then we have another one which is FTP icon, where you get more access to more content and more perks as well as part of the membership. So feel free to join our membership. And I've mentioned this before on my previous shows. For every new member, I plan to donate £1 to charity on a regular occurrence. So that's something I wanted to go for every new member that I get. I feel like it's only right to give back. So for me, I will donate £1 to charity for every new member. So that's something I plan on doing on the long term. So yeah, hopefully I can grow the community further with new members, and yeah, I'll try and produce as much exclusive content as possible. So yeah, that's a new sort of pathway that I'm going through in terms of my YouTube/ content creation journey. So feel free to show your support and get involved as well. And that is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care, stay safe, and I hope to see you guys very, very soon. Goodbye.